Hello and welcome back to the Straight Line Path podcast. I'm joined here with my co-host Peter. Now, in this episode, we had an excellent sit down with Jim Callaghan. Jim is the former General Counsel for Ryanair, Etihad, and Uber, and now runs Wellness Story with his wife Natasa, who is one of the former co-founders of Wizz Air.
We discussed why the hustle culture is a facade, working with Michael O'Leary, why you're on the road to burnout, and how to best leverage your health so you can best perform in all aspects of your life. We hope you enjoy. Hi, Jim. Thanks for joining the Straight Line Path.
Hi, gentlemen. Thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. So for the listeners at home who don't know you, what do you do and why do you do it?
Okay, well, it's probably a bit of a roundabout answer, but my background is I have a legal training and worked on the corporate side for a number of years, mostly with airlines, some of whom you might be familiar with, a little known airline called Ryanair. Started my aviation career and then was with Etihad Airways in the Middle East and finally with Uber. Came down to the ground for the last part of my corporate career. But I suppose, like a lot of folks in the corporate world, started to have some significant health issues later in my career. And so over COVID, my wife, Natasa, and I had the opportunity to kind of figure out these health issues for ourselves. And, we started to realize that, and certainly from my point of view, if I had known this stuff when I was, in my career, I would have been much more effective and happier. And so we started to realize, and friends and family started to recognize the changes that we went through. And that's when we kind of decided that to share some of our learnings with our corporate colleagues, particularly in the aviation field, because that's what both of us know. My wife, Natasa, is one of the co-founders of Wizz Air. So, low cost industry, hard charging, constantly on. And so she had some fairly similar issues to mine. And so that's really where this notion of, wellness story and sharing our journey with people to try and help them to balance health with career. Because what we found ourselves was that your biggest performance enhancer is actually your health. And it's actually one of the first things that goes by the wayside as you progress in a busy career.
Yeah, and what was life like back then when even yourself, your wife, when you were working in corporate, what was the day-to-day like that actually led to your health falling by the wayside?
I still have nightmares about the early mornings, early morning commute up to the airport, getting up at hideous o'clock in the morning to try and beat some of the worst traffic. And, kind of Ryanair was a bit of a war zone, given the nature of the company and the industry. And so you're battling for 10, 12 hours a day and then fighting traffic again on the way back home, and then trying to juggle family life, constantly having to check your phone, falling into bed exhausted, not being able to sleep because your brain is totally wired, and then getting up the next day and repeating the same over and over again. And when you're young, like you boys, you can get away with that for a while. Your body is very resilient. And so when you're passionate about what you do, you just keep pushing through. And, that's your day-to-day reality. So I spent the first 9 years of my airline career with Ryanair. And we went, I think when I joined, they were doing like 6.5 million passengers per annum. When I left 9 years later, it was 65 million.
Okay.
I mean, the rate of growth And all that that entails from the people working there was just phenomenal. And so then when I moved to Etihad Airways in the Gulf, I thought maybe a change is as good as a rest to an old horse, as they say. But you face the same kind of issues. It's the industry, it's rapid growth, different business model, obviously, but the same kind of challenges. And so you kind of fall back into the pattern. Go to work, fight all day, home, trying to get some kind of relaxation. And so by the time I left the Middle East and joined Uber, I think, to be honest, I was probably burned out already. But you don't acknowledge these things. You're a senior manager. You just keep going. And so Uber was kind of the last straw for me, where I went into an environment where it was like I was the oldest guy in the office, trying to compete with 20-something-year-olds. And just a crazy environment. Again, the regulatory environment, the stage of growth of the company at the time. That's kind of when things went really off the rails. And it's not an all of a sudden issue. It had been building up for years beforehand. But if you keep ignoring the signals, your body will eventually give you a signal that you can't ignore. And thankfully, it wasn't something catastrophic for me, but that was the kind of catalyst that led me to realize that, I got to start being serious about my health.
And what are some of those signals that people should be looking out for before, like you said, that catastrophic event occurs?
Yeah, I think, it's a stressful world that we live in. And we can talk a lot about stress and good stress and bad stress. But I think a lot of the times particularly in these kind of industries, it's chronic levels of stress. And again, you're just going. You're day to day. You're just charging hard. But the problem is that we're not machines, and we have to listen to our natural rhythms. And if you keep ignoring those rhythms, like your mindset, your nutrition, your movement, and your sleep, you can get away with it for a while, but you start to notice. For me, it was energy levels, focus are through the floor. You have some digestive issues. You just like low energy all the time. And it's a combination of just ignoring your natural rhythms that we have to operate to, or else we start to get sick. And that's, I think, things like trouble sleeping, constant worrying during the day, these kind of things, they're not normal. And that's those are the kind of signals that you need to listen to. And then, things like getting constantly sick, colds, your immune system is down, your mood, you're short with your wife, your kids. Like, these are things that you have to notice and think this is not normal.
100%. And just on that stress point, I think it's becoming, or it's getting a little bit more limelight now, at least from what I'm realizing. Yeah. And we're looking at the links between chronic stress and diseases now. But just in terms of stress overall, what's the difference, or how do you differentiate between good stress and bad stress?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think stress tends to get a bad rap. Yeah. The reality is that stress is an amazing mechanism that has not only kept us alive, but has propelled us to being the top dog on the planet. Yeah. And when you think about stress, the stress response, when we face any kind of a challenge, our bodies react and we become supercharged in order to face that challenge or to run the hell away from it. The problem is that when we were evolving, this was a short-term and relatively rare thing to happen. Like if you met a lion when you were hunting, yeah, you either fought the thing or you ran the hell away from it. The problem is that nowadays, everything triggers the stress response. Like bad traffic when I was going to work, a bad email from your boss, a fight with your spouse. Everything triggers these kind of low levels of stress. And our bodies are just not used to dealing with that constant level of stress. Having said that, we need a certain amount of stress to motivate us. Like you think about, you know, if you're taking an exam or something, if you're not stressed about it, you're not going to do well on your exam. So there's that level of stress that we need to kind of keep us motivated. And again, from an evolutionary point of view, it made perfect sense, because when you got up in the morning, you had to go and find something to eat, right? So you needed to have that little jab to make sure that, yeah, I'm ready. I'm going out. I'm going to hunt. I'm going to get something to eat. But again, you know, so we still need that to be successful in our careers. You need that kind of nice little bit of oomph to get you out of bed in the morning, get you excited about the day ahead. The problem is that's kind of drowned out these days by all of this other sources of stress that we're constantly dealing with, or in most cases not dealing with. And so that's when it becomes a problem, when you're constantly redlining on your stress levels and you're not managing it properly.
And how do you manage your stress properly? Because we've seen a lot nowadays about the hustle culture, and
Yeah.
as you know, early starting off in your career, you need to be doing as much as possible, as often as possible. How do you manage, your growth whilst also managing your stress?
Yeah, it's the $1 million question. Where is that kind of Goldilocks zone between good stress and bad stress, where you're performing at your highest level, but you're not burning yourself out? And that's what we spend most of our time on, and that's what we developed the model to try and find that intersection between your health and performance. And so, you know, there's no kind of one thing that you need to do. It's this, again, balance of all of the different drivers of health. So it's your mindset, you know, getting your mind looking at stress in the right way, because a lot of the problem with stress is that we stress about it.
Yeah.
And there's actually
100%.
studies that have been done where, depending on how somebody views stress, if you view it as something that's damaging to your health, you're much more likely to have health issues than if you're somebody who views stress as, yeah, this is something that allows me to meet the challenges I need to face. So it's a lot of what we're dealing with is a mindset issue. And to be quite honest, personally, that's what we came to last. Everybody thinks about, you know, going on a diet or, you know, beating yourself up in the gym. But until you get your mindset correct, none of this matters, and particularly in the area of stress. And so, you know, one of the things that again, we tend to not realize until you actually think about it, is that the number of things that we're carrying around in our brain, it's like having programs running in your head all the time, like the background noise, like the war in Iran or climate change or, you know, the weather, whatever it is. You're not necessarily conscious of all this stuff, but it is having an impact. And then if you add real life stresses, like, you know, your child has a disease, or, yeah, you have health issues, or, you know, dealing with an asshole boss, you know, these are things that yeah, they're immediate, you can feel them, but all of this together is what's causing the stress load that we're all dealing with. And so how do you actually manage that? And there's a number of ways. We have a really good exercise that we do where you literally get all this stuff out of your head and put it onto a piece of paper. So just really be conscious about, okay, what's bothering me? Like, what is this low level anxiety that I'm carrying around all the time? Get it down on a piece of paper and then categorize it by what I have complete control over. right? So what's stressing me out that I actually have control over? If you have control over it, put a plan around it and deal with it. What do you? Why do you need to stress about it? Just get it done. If, on the other hand, there are things that you have absolutely no control over, like I can't control the war in Iran, but it's stressing me out. Like we're moving to the Middle East in a couple of months, so you can bet your bottom dollar that it's stressing the hell out of me. There's nothing I can do about it. So in those circumstances, you take, you just don't worry about it. It sounds easy, but there's that gray area. And actually, that's probably kind of a gray area when I think about it, because there are things we can do. Like we can delay the trip to a certain extent if we need to. So even areas that you don't think you have control over, like the weather, I can't control the weather, but you can actually dress appropriately, So it's just trying to recognize that you have a lot of things that you're not necessarily conscious of, bring those to your consciousness, and then figure out, is there something I can do about it? Then do it and stop stressing about it. And if there's literally nothing you can do about it, then just ignore it. It's not worth spending your time stressing about it.
Yeah. I think the writing it down on paper, getting it out of the program in your head and actually getting it onto paper is super powerful, and I don't think is even talked about enough. To be honest, personally, Peter's always the one telling me to do that. He's the one who put me on to writing and reflecting, etc.
Yeah.
So we know, say for example, someone's dealing with chronic stress. We know that the first steps to take, it's to recognize it, it's to put it down on paper, see what's within your locus of control. What are the negative effects of chronic stress? Like, how does it manifest itself?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of science around this, but the bottom line is that the price that we pay for this ability to become superhuman in limited circumstances is that it's actually the chemicals that we produce so quickly when a stressor comes along, they're actually quite toxic for the body. And so in nature, again, you would have few instances of this where if it happens, it's because you need it. Mm-hmm. And then interestingly, once the stressor is gone, so you've either killed a lion or you've run away from it, you would completely de-stress, right? Think about if you just ran away from a lion. What's the first thing you do? You collapse on the ground and you stay there until your system completely resets itself. And I've seen this firsthand. I spent some time with the Hadza tribe in Tanzania, and they live pretty much as we used to 200, 300,000 years ago. And I've seen these folks deal with actual stress. We were on a hunt and they cornered a hyena in its den. Total bedlam. They hunt with dogs. Dogs are going crazy. The guys are tunneling from the side into this hyena's burrow. And we're sitting there like, what the hell is going on? And at a certain stage, they tunneled through. One of the young hunters reached his arm in and grabbed the hyena by its back leg to pull it out of the den. Now, you talk about stress. I don't think we deal with that kind of stress. Like, that's actual stress. But when they're finished, they sit down and they light a fire. They light it by hand, by the way. They don't have any matches. They do the whole friction thing. And they totally de-stress. They talk about what just happened. They laugh, they joke for about an hour. And in the meantime, they're cooking the organ meat from the animal because it doesn't last till they get back to the camp. So they're eating the meat. And it's the most amazing example of how we should be dealing with stress. I'm not talking about, lighting a fire every time, but, we just keep going on to the next stressful event. and there's no physical release. You know, there's no way of getting the stuff out of your body. So we're storing all of this toxic stuff in our body. And then if you're like most office workers, you're literally just sitting there in a pool of toxic stuff in your system. Because it can't go anywhere, because you need to be moving in order to get this stuff out of your body.
Yeah, so that leads into my next question then. What can we do in a modern day practice? So I don't think you could go tell your boss you're going for a lie down on the mat or you want to light a fire. For somebody maybe who's working, what can you do to best remove these toxins from your body?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, as you say, in our modern corporate world, and I think that's one of our objectives, is to kind of change the thinking behind how we work. Because unfortunately, I mean, people still don't really understand all of this the stress. You know, everybody talks about stress, but there's very little talk about how it actually impacts your body and how you can actually minimize the risks of operating in these kind of environments. And so, you know, that's one of the things that we're trying to educate companies about, is there are ways, of limiting employees' exposure to this kind of stress in the first place. And we can talk about a leader's role in that, and the fact that leaders are generally one of the leading causes of stress in any environment. And I have a lot of personal anecdotes on that front. But also, like, just very simple things like making sure that you're breaking up your day, getting out of your chair, like just getting up and doing some kind of movement. Because again, the physiology of sitting all day, like your heart is having to pump harder because you've got two kinks in your major blood vessels. You think about a hose. If you kink a hose in two places, there's not a lot of water that's going to get out. So your heart has to be pumping harder to keep blood going to your head. A lot of your blood is pooling in your ankles. And things like your lymphatic system, it doesn't work if you're not moving. Your lymphatic system doesn't have a pump, so it requires you to be moving. So just simple little things like setting a timer every hour and just getting up and doing some kind of movement. Walk to the water cooler, do a bit of stretching by your chair. But if that's not part of the corporate culture, people are not going to do it because it looks weird. And by the way, the boss is not doing it. That's the problem with a lot of these kind of wellness initiatives, because if the guys upstairs aren't doing it, nobody's going to do it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I never thought about the heart having to pump more, and that we actually had two kinks
Yeah.
in it. Wow, that's okay. That's more of an initiative or a reason for me to get up every
Well,
hour.
and by the way, from a performance point of view, think about it this way.
Yeah.
If your heart is having problems getting oxygen to your brain, which takes about 20% of your energy of your body. So you want to make sure that this thing up here is working at its maximum. If you're not getting the fuel to the brain, people wonder, well, why am I sitting at my desk and I can't remember what the next thing I'm supposed to do? Everybody looks busy because they're at their desk doing this.
Yeah.
But if you actually measure the level of the performance, it's massively suboptimal. And it's not their fault. It's just physiology. If you're sitting there and your heart is having to work harder to get oxygen to your brain, it's a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be at your optimal or anywhere close to it.
Yeah. You mentioned culture and this kind of top-down approach where leadership having to be involved in wellness initiatives. How do you see that and its impact on actually creating a workforce or a company where people don't have chronic stress, people don't have these health problems?
Yeah. So I think it's challenging to break through this hustle culture as you talk about it. I think every company I've worked for is just charge, just go, 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 go. This is the objective, just go. But I think the science and the data is entirely clear now. And if we look at things like last year, Gallup released a comprehensive study on engagement levels and the cost of the lack of engagement. It's a chronic lack of engagement that they're measuring in companies throughout the world is costing to the global economy $8.8 billion. No, sorry. Let me try that again. $8.8 trillion globally every year is being wasted through lack of productivity due to the horrendous engagement levels. They recorded a drop from 23% down to 21%. So only 21% of employees are fully engaged, or as near as fully engaged as you can get. And the cost of that drop, 2 percentage points of a drop, $438 billion. So it's a massive problem. But companies, I think even the leaders are so locked in this survival mode, this stress response. And, everybody, hustle, everybody's working super hard. But when you actually measure the productivity, it's massively suboptimal. And another really good report was done by the Workwell leaders on the cause of this lack of engagement. And what they found is that the leadership team is 70% responsible for the engagement levels of their employees. So 70% of that $8.8 billion directly relates to the leadership team. And the number one driver of leadership effectiveness is their wellness. If they're healthy, if they feel good, if they're genuinely healthy, that is the number one driver of their effectiveness, which is driving 70% of the engagement issue of employees. Now, those are pretty convincing numbers. So at the same time as companies are pumping billions of dollars into wellness programs for the employees, if they were simply investing in the leadership team, even a fraction of that, it has an outsized impact on their effectiveness and the overall effectiveness of their teams and the companies.
And given the amount, like the numbers you said there, astronomical, like over 8 trillion, how or why aren't companies doing more? And why aren't they doing more to promote health in the workplace and, like you said, training leaders?
So I think this is kind of relatively recent. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Like when you think about it, and when I think about my experience being one of these senior managers, like I always had the sense that something was off, but you just keep going. And so I kind of suspected that my performance was suboptimal. Obviously, you're not going to admit that to your boss, and I also recognized that my health issues were having a direct impact on my teams. Like, you know that. Like, if I come in and I'm in a bad mood, I haven't slept well, I feel like shit, obviously that's going to have an impact on my team. A leader's role is to engage and inspire their teams. If you feel like crap, there is no chance in hell that you're going to be able to do that. And I remember Michael O'Leary's assistant, Adele, used to have this, I don't know where she got it from, it was like a magnetic mood meter for, outside his door. And for some reason, it was always stuck on pissed off. And, you could just feel the mood on the floor when Michael would be in his office, and he's intense, so he's going blah, blah, blah. Everybody else is like, fuck, so leaders have an outsized impact on how the rest of the company operates. And again, that's evident from these massive numbers. And so I think it's getting to the point, and we're hoping it's at the point where you can't deny it anymore. Like, you need to start addressing this issue. And the issue is, if your leaders are not healthy, your company's not healthy. And it's having a huge impact on your bottom line.
I'm just thinking now, because I can feel the backlash of some of this. Like, we give the example of Ryanair here and Michael O'Leary, and how this is maybe, it's always, the mood meter was always pissed off. Yet you look at Ryanair's performance, and they've been one of the fastest growing and top performing companies. What do you say to those people who would say, well, the numbers don't lie, or whatever it is they may say?
Yeah, it's a really, really good one. And it's kind of, my wife, Natasa, is fascinated by this issue as well. I mean, she's worked for some pretty toxic bosses as well. But, the question is, can a leader who leads through trust and respect of his or her people, can they be as successful as somebody who just beats the living shit out of everyone? And unfortunately, we have this notion that, the best leaders in the world are the ones who are just like, take no prisoners, just keep going. And it's an interesting one with Ryanair. And I've thought about this a lot. And I think, science needs to study Michael O'Leary, because I don't know how the hell he's been able to keep going at the rate he has for the last 35, 40 years. Like, he is an enigma. The problem is that he is in the tiny minority of people who are able to just keep that level without apparently having any kind of breaks, stops, whatever it is. So clearly you're right. Ryanair is an example of a company that is massively successful, and a lot of it is down to Michael and his stamina and his ability to see the future and just go, and everybody else is going to come kicking and screaming along the way. I don't think that's a healthy culture for the vast majority of people. I think there are certain managers who can survive that, but ultimately it's not good for the people underneath. That's one thing. And the second thing is, how much more successful could Ryanair be if there was an emphasis on respecting and encouraging people's health? I'm not like, the problem is, this doesn't take away from the success of a company. Quite the contrary, it multiplies the success of a company. So things like, making sure that people take a break when they naturally need to. So there's this thing in the book called the ultradian rhythm, where our bodies, like at night, have certain rhythms and stages. And so your hormones are have this beautiful dance. It's a 90-minute cycle. And so if you are in tune with your body, you can feel when you're up, you're like in the flow, you're kicking it, and then eventually, after about an hour and a half, you're like, oh shit, I really feel kind of low energy. That's your body's natural message to you to say, you need to take a break. And I'm not talking about going like for a half an hour, fecking off for a break. I'm talking about 5 minutes to get up, stretch your legs, hydrate, get some water, and then get back into the flow. And the science is very clear that when people, and I'm a living example of this, I'm more productive in my day-to-day in 6 hours than I was in 12 hours, much more, because I listen to when my body says, okay, you need to take a break. Because if you keep pushing through, it's diminishing returns. You might still be doing something, but it's totally suboptimal. So what I would say to companies is there's certain basic principles that every human being is subject to. And if you can optimize your company culture and the way you deal with your people, it is going to have a huge impact on the bottom line. And by the way, your employees are going to thank you for it because they're more healthy and more happy in their lives. And happy and healthy people are going to go a hell of a lot further than somebody who's disengaged and only sitting at their desk and doing as little as they possibly can not to get fired. And unfortunately, 79% of people in the world, apparently, according to Gallup, are in that latter category.
Yeah, I completely agree, Jim, especially on the what's actually productive. Now, we've tied health with company's performance, the culture, the company's bottom line, essentially. For those leaders, how do they make changes? Like, where should they focus? I know you mentioned 4 things in your book, but where should they focus to make changes in their health so that it can have a positive impact on their team, their staff, and then the company overall?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's the biggest answer we hear people saying, and I was in that category myself, is that I know health is important, but I don't have the time. Like, where am I going to find the time?
Yeah.
I'll deal with it. When I have a bit more time. Okay, so the first thing to say is that this doesn't take a lot of time, and in fact, the time that you save through better productivity is paid back in spades. If you just take the time to do this. And so, we go through this in the book. We identified what we call the 4 drivers of health: mindset, nutrition, movement, and sleep. And in each of those areas, our bodies are tied to natural rhythms. So for example, sleep, we have this circadian rhythm, and we need to sleep a certain amount. There's between 7 and 8 hours. It depends on who you are and what stage in life you're at. But in order to get proper sleep, you need to have a sufficient amount of sunlight during the day. Sounds bizarre, but our clock, our internal circadian clock, is set every day by the sun. So if you're like me, when I was in Ryanair in the wintertime, when you're driving to work in the morning and it's dark, and you're driving home in the evening and it's dark, and for the whole day you're sitting under fluorescent lighting, your body doesn't know whether it's feckin' day or night when you're trying to go to sleep. So that's one example. The second is nutrition. Like, if we're not getting the kind of nutrients that we need in our body, our hormones are all over the place. That knocks on to our ability to move. We feel sluggish during the day, and it's going to knock on to your sleep at night. And all of this is controlled by your mindset. So, and we discovered all of this, by trial and error. Like, we were in the same camp as everyone else. You associate health with, I got to go on a diet or I got to go to the gym. And it's short term and it doesn't last. because our habits are so hardwired into our brains that, it's very difficult to change our lifestyles. And so, it's really looking at how to balance each of these drivers so that it has a positive knock-on impact onto the rest of the drivers. And that's where we came up with the takeoff model, is to kind of translate those natural rhythms into a kind of a roadmap in terms of how you start to tackle your health issues.
And you mentioned there about some of those habits and some of them being short term. If somebody's getting started now on their health journey, or they're just starting to take their health serious, what are some of the things they should look at and then to implement if they want to have long lasting benefits?
Yeah, so I think the first step is recognizing that you need to do something, and once you've made that decision, I need to make changes. Then it's the issue is how you actually do that, because the interesting thing about the mindset piece is that our brains are remarkably efficient engines, and their only job in life is to keep us alive, when you think about it. And if we're alive, then the brain says, hey, I'm doing my job, and it's very reluctant to change anything, right? Because change is bad. Change could kill you. So your brain is hardwired to say, if you're alive, I'm not going to change anything unless you convince me the opposite. And so the first three letters of the takeoff model, TAK, are dedicated to the process of trying to get your mind on board for the changes. So the T is turn off autopilot. We operate huge amounts of our day just on autopilot, unconsciously. You know yourself, you're driving your car, and all of a sudden you end up going a different way than what you need to go, because that's the way you go every day. So our minds are like that. They're programmed to follow certain habitual patterns so that you don't have to think about it anymore. But if those patterns are damaging to your health, that's when you need to switch off the autopilot and say, no, like this, I can't do this anymore. This is damaging my health. Once you've started that process of recognizing, okay, this is my pattern, I get up in the morning and the first thing I do is I slam myself with a cup of coffee. A lot of people are in that category. Once you realize, actually, no, that's not good. If I delay it for an hour after getting up, I've given my body sufficient time to naturally wake itself up, which we need to do. And then, yeah, fine, a coffee is great. Get in the car, have a coffee, off to work. So that's the turn off autopilot. Then it's addressing the elephant in the room, which is address your stress. And we talked about how you can start to do that, recognize what kinds of things are stressing you out, and start to deal with them so that you're less in survival mode all of the time. Once you've done those two steps, then you can really start to question, why is this important to me? So K is know your why. And unless you have that deep emotional anchor, like this has to be so personal to me that when things start to go wrong, I have to travel, you fall off the wagon and you don't get back on again. When you know why you're doing this, like why this is so critical to you, that replaces motivation. It's like, no, this is who I am. I'm not going to have a beer at 11 o'clock at night because I know it's going to screw my sleep. So that's the mindset piece. And it's something that it's not one and done. You have to constantly remind yourself, oh shit, I'm doing it again. Address your stress. What's stressing me out today? How do I deal with it? And then reminding yourself what's your why. And then the rest of the model is eat yourself healthy. So it's talking about why food is so important to us. Um, Overhaul your movement. Address or what's the first is fix your sleep. So those are the nutrition, movement, and sleep. And then the last F is fasten your seatbelt. And that's my favorite one because it reminds us that health is not like a one-time issue. Like you go on a diet, you go to the gym for a few months. It's a lifelong journey, and you need to strap yourself in because this should be the most important thing in your life because everything else flows from it, including your performance at work.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I completely agree. And that's where I think, and it could be a question to you, I think that's where a lot of people fall short. And it's where a lot of the mistakes are made. Like,
Yeah.
apart from that, when people actually start this journey where they take their health seriously, what are the kind of mistakes that you see people often make?
I think people tend to want perfection. They're very short-termism. Like, I need to lose 5 kilos to go to my sister's wedding in 3 weeks. I want it done. Like, give me a pill, get it done. But the second issue is, expecting perfection all the time. Like, this is my routine. I need to do this 100% or nothing. And, so if you fall off the wagon once, it's like, oh, well, what's the point? I have no motivation. I'm terrible at this. So it's about consistency, trying to have a foundation that you try every single day, just simple things. It's not about going to the gym for an hour a day. It's about getting up in the morning, having, a glass of water first thing to rehydrate yourself and do a stretching routine for 5 minutes. Like, who the hell can't do that? It's noticing your breathing patterns throughout the day, making sure that you're breathing primarily through your nose instead of your mouth. It's hydrating. It's getting up every hour and doing a bit of movement. So it's the simple things that have a huge impact on your overall health and well-being. And then once you start to feel the impact of that on your overall mood, your energy levels, then it's easy to start investing a little bit more. And maybe it is getting a gym membership and going 2 or 3 times a week to do some strength training. Maybe it is, buying higher quality food and giving your body the nutrition it needs. And it certainly has to be that your sleep is sacrosanct. That you're not saying, if I limit my sleep to 5 or 6 hours, I'll have another couple of hours during the day to get a bit more work done. Absolute insanity. And that's still the corporate culture in a lot of places. Oh, I can survive on 5 hours sleep a night. A, no, you can't. And B, you're going to pay for it later on because there's such a huge connection between all kinds of lifestyle diseases, including dementia and short sleeping. So this kind of nonsense that sleep is something you can sacrifice. It's not. It's when huge amounts of work go on in your body to regenerate and also to store memory. So it's in terms of learning and dealing with people the next day. It's all related to getting good quantity and quality of sleep.
Jim, we love the work you're doing. It's so important. I think more people need to be talking about this. If anyone listening along today wants to find out more, they want to read the book, they want to link in with you, where should they go?
Yeah, so our website is wellnessstory.world. They can find the book on Amazon and some of the other booksellers. We publish some white papers from time to time. And yeah, just love engaging on these kind of forums to kind of get that message out there. So really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys today.
It's been our pleasure. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
Cheers, guys.